All right, we turn our attention now to the Cleveland Browns on the Irish NFL show's off-season preview as we look ahead. This time, looking at the AFC North. Shane, the Browns last year, probably the best thing that happened to them ultimately was that Deshaun Watson got injured, because that allowed Joe Flacco to have a little bit of an Indian summer in his career and take them to the playoffs. Deshaun is back in harness this year and still looking to make good on that incredibly rich, fully guaranteed contract, which so far has looked like a giant albatross around the Cleveland Browns' neck.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and it couldn't really happen to a worse team, a team that since it has come back into the league has only made 3 playoff appearances. In fairness, that it did do that last year in thanks in no small part to the fantastic resurgence of Joe Flacco and the way he played for in the tail end of the regular season last year. I think it has to be said, though, that no player in the league is under more pressure than Deshaun Watson. He hasn't played a full full season since 2020. How do you expect to sit out and only be playing bit part roles for 3 years now, to come in with all the money and all the pressure in the division you're in, to take the pressure as a starting quarterback and to try and play in a way that your contract says that you should be able to play? We talk so much about the pressure and how much we should expect of young players who are coming in who haven't played in the league.
He's a unique kind of pressure, Shane, really, because it's not just that he's under pressure to succeed. A lot of people actively want him to fail because of what he's done off the field, and a lot of people would say rightly so.
That's why I'm just wondering, what is the best situation for Cleveland here? Is the best situation in the long run for the Browns one where Deshaun Watson crashes and burns? You have a reason just to get rid of him and start again, because there are components in the rest of the squad which can be built upon. When Nick Chubb comes back, I know he's recovering from knee surgery this year. We probably won't see much from this season, but that is a good player that can come back into the future. The defense last year came up very strong in a lot of games. They were probably the real reason why they sort of kept in the balance for much of that middle section of the season last year. Like, they're not a team that needs a rebuild, but I think there's a lot saying that this year, the Browns really should be setting up for not only a losing season, but a season where there's negative vibes, there's negative press. The Deshaun Watson does not come off as somebody who maybe endears himself to fans, not only of people in Cleveland, but of fans of the game itself. It just is not a good mix. And I think it is just another extension of what I think will prove, and hindsight is, of course, 2020, will prove to be maybe not foolish, but a badly thought out deal to bring in Deshaun Watson in the first place for the amount of money he was given.
No, we're looking at the Browns and the strength of the team, probably again going to be the defense. And, we take what Shane has said on board about how Deshaun Watson is going to go and maybe look at the other side of the ball. They've got maybe pound for pound one of the best players in the league in Myles Garrett. They've added a couple of nice pieces there as well, and Zadarius Smith for one at defensive end, and some interesting pickups on the offensive side of the ball too. Deontay Foreman, who had a good cameo with the Bears last year, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver, and 2 now backup quarterbacks in Jameis Smith and Tyler Huntley. This is one of the stronger rosters in the league, all things considered.
No, it certainly is. And like you mentioned, the quarterback there, obviously Shane was talking about Deshaun Watson. It's interesting they brought in 2 quarterbacks who can be considered kind of high-end backups. So, maybe they're bringing a bit of insurance in there for Deshaun Watson. Then, yeah, you mentioned Zadarius Smith, who was obviously a really good player. Nick Chubb was mentioned as well earlier, obviously by Shane, who had that injury. Excuse me. So you talked about Deontay Foreman, who I think is actually a very good running back. And in Chicago, it kind of didn't work out for him. But I think probably because he didn't play special teams, he never got dressed week in, week out. But when he did come in, he actually showed what kind of a player he is. So I think from top to bottom, this Browns team is a very good team. I think if things go right, they could absolutely challenge. They have a really good offensive line that, if it stays fit, can really give the quarterback and the running backs a lot of protection and open up holes. So I think if this team stays fit and the quarterback situation, however it works for it, this team can pose a lot of problems, and they can give the Ravens a lot of trouble if the Ravens aren't at the top of their game. But again, look, it's with most teams, it comes back to the quarterback. And Shane talked all about this, Deshaun Watson, and you mentioned the pressure he's going to be under, not just for on the field, but for off the field, and the whole contract that comes with that. And it's just going to be interesting to see how he delivers this year. Because if he does deliver, and if he gets back, they don't even need him to get back to top Deshaun Watson. They just need a bit more production from him, and they need him to be healthy and there week in, week out. And if he can be half the player he's been in the past when he was on top form, then like this Browns team can cause a lot of problems and go to the playoffs. And then look, once you hit the playoffs, who knows kind of where you go from there.
Brian, I know, let's give you your flowers. You were very high on the Browns, and with just cause, when we were doing these previews this time last year, there were a certain number of raised eyebrows elsewhere in the room, but you proved us all wrong. And one of the big assets that they have, and we talked when we were doing our NFC divisional previews about coaches showing their mettle when they were down quarterbacks or when there was big transition happening. We talked about Matt LaFleur and Sean McVay being in that category. Kevin Stefanski very much in that category too. And a lot of people shout for coach of the year last year for the adversity that they managed to overcome. He knows what he's doing, and that should give anyone who follows the Browns hope.
Yeah, I think for the last couple of years, Browns fans have been frustrated by, the offense hasn't really been at the level in which they would expect for a certain amount of players in which they have in the squad, but the defense hasn't been right. You bring in, it was a fantastic acquisition to bring in Schwartz last year, experienced defense coordinator. We saw it week 1 against the Bengals, and we saw it over the course of the season. He's touched on the various different players they have, and they got a good secondary last year. They were one of the best secondaries in the league. You looked at the numbers midpoint of the season in terms of touchdowns given up, big plays given up. They were number 1 across the board in all the various different rankings. They had it, and the defense kind of, I wouldn't say it fell apart towards the back end of the season, but what we wasn't playing at the level in which we saw earlier on in the season, it kind of transpired that way when they went up against the Texans. I mean, we were expecting a low-scoring defensive-minded game in the playoffs, and by halftime, the Texans had put up 24 points against a defense. Just kind of ran out of steam, I felt, towards the end of the season. And offensively, it didn't really click for large parts, and you get Joe Flacco coming in, and obviously he has a great finish to the season. I'm still high on Deshaun Watson coming back, and I think the more we move away from the contract in terms of how long ago since he got the deal, the more people are going to start to forget about the nature of it. Like Shane's saying, can they get away from it? They can't get out of it. It's 63 million cap hit this year. It's 60 million next year. There's just no stepping away from this unless they're going to, bite the bullet and find another quarterback, which Noel has touched on there too. Very different experienced quarterbacks coming in, and maybe they feel they can move on from him, but realistically, you cannot have.
The other thing to bear in mind here, Brian, is this is a very flawed character, to put it mildly. Like, who's to say an off-season issue doesn't emerge and they have to get rid of him, because if anything happens, he's done.
Well, the off-season looks like it's a little bit better for him this year because he was in a beta with his partner, and he looks like he's having a good time. He certainly looks like he's not concerned about any off-the-field antics that's gone on in the past and what people have maybe think of him. One thing what popped up last season, it wasn't the players were disgusted by what had gone before in terms of him coming to the Browns. It was more about him limping out of games with injuries and people suggesting that if he really wanted to run the heaven and air for this team and for the players, he could easily go back in and step in and be a quarterback, because we've seen other quarterbacks in the past with shoulder injuries step up and get on with it. When he didn't, he backed off. And then there was a narrative around, you look at, and you're talking about 2 quarterbacks in the division. When Joe Burrow was injured, you look at the players on the sideline rallying around Joe Burrow. When Deshaun Watson was injured, he was sitting on the sideline in isolation on his own, and nobody was really making any input to go over to him or help him or see how he was. That kind of strikes me as a team that right now, whilst they might have a great coaching staff and some really good players, and they're going in the right direction, they're not bought into the quarterback. And ultimately, that's kind of what leaves them short in the end. But I certainly think because of the defensive nature and because they have brought in some players, I think they'll still be there challenging. But big year for Deshaun Watson, but I don't think it'll be about the contract. I think it's more about how he plays on the field.